أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدة الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين ورحمة للعالمين سيدنا ونبينا وشفيع ذنوبنا وحبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا مولانا أبي القاسم محمد
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم.
ثم الصلاة والسلام على آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس ويطهرهم تطهيرا.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم.
رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي اللهم وانطقني بالهدى. وقال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وفرقانه الحميد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا قوا أنفسكم وأهليكم نارا صدق الله العظيم صلوات.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل
My mothers and sisters in Iman, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
The topic that we have been discussing throughout this series of majalis has been building strong families in a changing world. And we started by reflecting on the verse from Surah Talaq, which is chapter 66, where in verse 6, where Allah is addressing the believers, which is all of us, inshallah. And He is saying, save yourselves and your families from a fire. Okay, this is just the beginning of the verse. And we have been reflecting on what that means in today's world, where there are so many pressures on the family. When there are so many things, we talked about the kind of the flight of an airplane, that before a pilot takes off, he has a manifesto. He has where he's going, he has an intention, he has a plan, and despite all his best plans, there are forces acting upon the aircraft which are outside his control. Weather, other traffic, whatever is happening outside the aircraft is not in his control. But because he has a plan, because he knows where he's going, and he has, an intention, a destination, this is how he kind of adjusts as he goes along. And for the vast majority of time, the flight lands where it is intended to. And we said that, taking that metaphor for our families, there are a lot of forces acting on our families today, which are outside our control. And the only way to kind of take our destination, which Allah is telling us, right? He's telling us first to start with ourselves, which is, as we know, the hardest. It is so much easier to want other people to change, to have expectations, to have instruction manuals for other people. But what Allah is telling us is start with yourself, save yourselves and your families from a fire. So whatever we talk about, and we've been saying this throughout, that whenever we hear something, the idea is we will always think of other people who need to hear this. Okay. And what is less obvious to us is how we can benefit. So just for the next little while, let's see how we can use what we learned today. So on that topic, we discussed a lot of things, and then we came to the idea of communication. Because we said that one of the things that makes a strong family, that holds the glue of family together, is the way they talk to each other. And we started by saying that although we always talk about talking, communication actually begins with listening. Listening is a far more important part of communication, which is harder in some instances in speaking. Then we talked about the kalimatut tayyibah, right? The idea that, what is good words? It turns out that the Quran has a whole vocabulary of words or kind of words that we're supposed to speak. And before that, even, we said that communication begins in the heart. So we talked about the hadith from the Masumeen, which say that the words start in the heart, they go through the filter of the thoughts, and then they come out of the mouth. So in order to purify our communication, we have to look at our intention. And one of the things that we said was kind of the golden rule for families is that we should learn to talk to each other, not about each other. Okay, learn to talk to each other, not about each other. So that is kind of, where we were. Some of the kind of words that we've discussed that the Quran asks us to use. The baseline for all communication is qawlul husn. The words which are beautiful, which are excellent, which are fit for purpose. Then we said for parents, there is another level altogether. Why we had a whole long session on why Allah asks us to have a completely different standard and what the aging process does to psychology and why people become so much more sensitive as they age. So for parents, we said is qawlul karima. And then we said that there are times when we need to be straight. We discussed how many of us have indirect conversations. We have indirect, we want somebody to hear, but we say to people who may not be, like, and we gave the example of WhatsApp messages, right? Family WhatsApp groups, which are just amazing places for drama, right? And we said that, the best kind of conversation is to the person, not about them, and using words which are direct, which are to the point, but at the same time are also excellent and kind. And we covered all that. Now, it is very, very easy to do all of that over a cup of tea. Okay. Problems happen when people are in conflict. You've heard the word conflict in families, right? That tends to be a big word. People say we have a lot of conflict. So today, let's look at what exactly is conflict. We'll look at anger, which is kind of makes conflict go sideways. That's what kind of grasp us. And today we'll spend actually most of the time actually understanding anger, understanding what is going on. And then in a future session, inshallah, we will talk about the practicalities. Because as you know, I always try to fit in too much and then it doesn't finish. So today I said, let me just break it up into two parts to start with. So can we have salawat?
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajum. Nare takbir, nare risalat, nare haydari, haydari, nare salwan. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajum.
So what is conflict? If I asked you to explain it to a 12-year-old, how would you say what is conflict? Any ideas? Saying, right? Conflict, sorry. Yes. No. I want you to answer. Disagreements. Okay. So argument is not really conflict. So conflict is basically when two people want different things. It's really simple. Like, we need to understand it, right? Because if we don't understand it, then we kind of mix everything up together. So when two people want two different things, and does anyone not have an example of that? So you get married, for those of you who are young, newlyweds, you enter this new house and everything about it is different. Their ways of celebrating birthdays, their way of getting up in the morning, the way they communicate with each other, everything is different. So two people wanting different things. Does it have to be that one is right and one is wrong? No, it's just that two people want different things. So conflict at its base level is this, okay? Disagreements we will come to. So the first kind of point to remember is that when two people are wanting different things, when two people have a different way of doing things, we need to remind ourselves that it doesn't mean that anyone is wrong or unkind. They could be two perfectly good human beings and they disagree. Not a big deal, right? The problem happens is that I have an instruction manual in my head. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? I know about you. I have a big instruction manual on how my children should behave. Okay. And, since we're talking about Imam Sajjad, let's give an example.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad Majid.
So I remember when my kids were young and they were growing up, of course, I grew up in a culture, came from a culture where children were just meant to obey parents. And we've been through that, right? We had a whole section on that. I won't go back there. But basically, in my idea, the thing was that if I'm asking my children to do something, I'm giving them an opportunity for sawab. Right? It's sawab to serve your parents. So why are they not jumping for joy? Like if I'm asking you to make me a cup of tea, you should be joyous that I am asking you to serve me. Okay. Now, can you imagine how that went in my house? So every time my children would kind of make a face and say, I'll do it later, and why me, and tell her. I had all of these, scripts going on in my head. They're wrong, how dare they, all of this, okay? And so in my mind, I had an instruction manual. I had a manual of how children should behave. That was the title of my manual. Now, the problem is my children hadn't read that manual, okay? And even if they read it, they really didn't buy into it. So this is what happens in conflict. It's not that anyone is right or wrong. It is that two people have different ideas. Now, the problem, what happens in families is that why it's harder. Like if I meet somebody at the mosque and we don't agree on something, it's really not such a big deal, right? Why does it mean so much in families? Because first of all, we're in very close proximity, right? We see these people day in and day out. Secondly, we have a high dependence on each other. Like these are the people that I want to meet my emotional needs, okay? And so everything my family does, it has a heightened kind of sensitivity to me. And thirdly, these relationships are kind of permanent. Now, we're not going to talk about, there are some people who choose to break relationships. That's for another topic, right? Generally, most of us want to maintain these relationships. So we're in close proximity. We're seeing these people in and out. We have disagreements. We can't walk away. We have high dependence and we have permanence. Okay? So it's no wonder that things are so, volatile. Okay. Again, we need to remind ourselves that happy families have conflict. Many times, when couples or families are seeking support, they're saying, well, we have this conflict and I just want you to help us solve this conflict. Okay? The problem with that kind of thinking is that it turns out what research shows us is that a lot of conflicts in families are not solvable. So how many of us have been married less than 5 years? Anyone? Any newlyweds? Okay, good. So I want to tell you something. What you are arguing about now, likely you will be arguing about on your 25th anniversary. That's the bad news. So people who've been married a long time, can you relate? Can you relate? That's what happens, right? A lot of conflict is not solvable, okay? However, there are good ways and bad ways to handle conflict, okay? Now, the absence of conflict, say if you never argue at home, you never have disagreements, does that mean that it is a happy home? Not always, right? Not always, because when people stop fighting, I always say fight, complain, those are good things, okay? We'll talk about what are not so good things, but it's not a bad thing to speak your needs, to kind of, duel it out. The opposite of that is just to go silent, to give up, to give up. When you are married a very long time or you have children which are older, you kind of give up and stop complaining. That doesn't mean if you've truly accepted, if you've accepted the other person, amazing, okay. However, if you're really not happy inside and you're just pretending to be and you're like, this is as good as it's going to get, that's not a healthy sign. Why? Because Islam has a very high standard for our relationships. We talked about the mawadda and the rahma and the sukoon, right? Those are not easy things. When we pray to God every single day, Rabbana hablana min azwajina wa zurriyatana qurrata ayunin wa ja'alna lil muttaqina imama. What does that mean? Oh Lord, make my spouses and my children the delight of my eyes. The delight. So you can be delighted with someone and want to kill them occasionally. Okay, this is what I want us to remember. It's not the end of the world. Now, what happens when we have conflict is that sometimes anger gets the best of us. So let's talk about what anger is. Now, how many people think that anger is a bad thing? Nobody here thinks anger is a bad thing. Everybody thinks that anger is a bad thing. Then why did Allah create anger? Why did Allah create anger?
Shows us what we need to heal within.
Okay, so it shows us what we need to heal. Okay, so triggers, you're talking about triggers. What else?
Things that for some things we have to get angry, right? That's certain things that.
Absolutely. So that's also another very important fact. Some, you see, Allah created the faculty of ghazab or anger in us for a very important reason. Oh my God, those poor people. They probably didn't hear anything. Okay, salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad wajil faraj.
So in the other room, if you can't hear, please someone come and tell us. Do not torture yourselves and just sit there. Okay? So what were you saying? That Allah created anger for a very good reason. Why? Because when we need to protect ourselves, we need to protect our families. We need to get angry at injustice. If we had no faculty of anger, we would not be able to get angry at things that need our anger. So there is a kind of anger for Allah, which we will not talk about today, okay? But what gets us into trouble is anger, which kind of is personal. And what scholars tell us, so Imam Khomeini, he has, many of us may have read it, he did an exposition of many of the hadiths. And in the hadith of anger, which is very dense, like it'll take you days to actually read and understand it, he kind of links all anger for personal reasons to the love of the self. Hubbul nafs or hubbul zat is what he calls it, right? And what he says is, so I'm going to read a portion of it, okay? He says, among the practical remedies, and we'll talk about the remedies, the important ones involve withholding the self in the initial stages of anger. This is because it is ignited little by little, becoming more intense until its furnace is set to burning fiercely. And when that happens, it gets completely out of control and shuts the lights of one's faith and intellect. So what is he saying? When the anger gets out of control, when you have not been able to self-regulate, when your self-control is gone, it will shut the lights of one's faith and intellect. This is very, very important. Why? Because what psychology shows us is that when you are in the throes of anger, when you kind of, we say lose it, right? When you lose it, what happens is that your thinking brain, the brain with which you know what to do, your brain with which the light of faith and intellect, that's what he calls it, right? It goes offline. It is no longer in operation. This is very important to know. And what has taken over? What has taken over? So the prefrontal cortex, right? Many of us may have heard that. Prefrontal cortex is like the front area of your brain, which is where thinking happens, right? Which is where higher processes happen, which is where our fitra lives, okay? There's another part of the brain, which is called the amygdala. The amygdala, just think of it as the alarm bell of the brain. It's the alarm bell. So if the alarm bell is signals, what happens is your frontal cortex goes offline. Now, this sounds very technical. I'm going to give you a very small example. Again, this is not a design flaw. Allah has created this with the most amazing precision. Why? Imagine you're walking down a road, okay? And you look down and you see something that looks like a stick or a snake. You're not sure. If your thinking brain is online, you will look at it, you will think about it. Is that a stick or is it a snake? Should I pick it up? What should I do? Meanwhile, if it is a snake, what happens? It's going to bite you, okay? The way Allah has designed our body, when we perceive threat, when something is threatening us, we cannot stop to consider what should we do. We have to act in a split second. So the way Allah has designed it, say, for example, if you see a snake and it's, you're not sure, your amygdala, your alarm bell will send a signal, danger, 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 and you will either run away or you will, hit the snake or you will do something to keep yourself safe. Does that make sense? Now, so there's a reason why your thinking brain is offline, right? Because if your thinking brain was online, you would spend too much time thinking. And those of us who are overthinkers, to mashallah, right? We would spend too much time thinking about it and then we would be hurt. So Allah has designed us so that we keep safe. Now, what does this have to do with families? Okay. So we've been hinting about the difference between complaining and criticizing. Remember, we mentioned it in a few lectures, right? When you are complaining to somebody about something, I go into the kitchen and my children have left, and apparently this is a very common scenario, so I will use it again. My children have been baking and they have left three things on the counter and the rest have been put away. Now, the way my brain works is I'm only going to focus on what's been thing. When my children come in, I'm going to tell them, you are so lazy, you are so ungrateful, you are so blah, blah, blah. What am I doing? Is that complaining? That is not complaining. That is criticizing. When a human being is criticized, it is the same experience as if a tiger is chasing you in the jungle. Your brain, your amygdala cannot tell those two things apart. So, what does this mean? When you are criticizing someone and they are losing it, what is happening to them? Their alarm bells have rung. Where is their thinking brain? Offline. And then what do we do? Women in particular love to have it out at that moment. So your older son, your sibling, whoever says, listen, I can't deal with this right now. They exit. And those of us who like to have it all out at that same time, what do? We chase them. We chase them and we say, no, you hear me out. We escalate, we scream more. Now, if you're screaming at a tiger, what's likely to happen? Can you have a conversation at that time? No. Why can you not? Because your thinking brain is offline. Therefore, when somebody, quote, is losing it, you cannot hope to have the conversation continue and it come to a proper resolution. If we know this, if we actually accept this in families, our lives would become so much easier. Okay. Now, what is exactly threatened? That is the question, right? How Imam Khomeini explains it and how other scholars explain it is that we have a sense of, in common language, what we would call the ego. What I love about myself, for example, might be I have a sense of control, I have a sense of competence, I feel good about myself in these ways. Now, all of that is not bad in essence. When somebody is telling me you are lazy, you are this, you are that, what's happening? It's my self-image that is being attacked. It is my sense of self that is being attacked. Therefore, when I am criticized, I cannot, and this is not an excuse, guys. This doesn't mean that, oh, I cannot, so I must respond like for like. No. What I'm saying is, for the person who's doing the aggression is who I'm talking to right now, okay? They cannot listen to us. In order to listen to anyone, your thinking brain needs to be online, okay? So how does he go on to explain? Where does this spark come from? The answer, self-love or hubbun nafs. Greed, avarice, and other such vices that take root in the heart as a result of self-love and the love of glory snatch the reins of reason from his hands, leaving the self to commit deeds that deviate from the path of divine law and reason. Okay, this is what kind of losing it looks like. So, instead of when we are having a moment of disagreement, when we are in the midst of conflict, okay, the best thing we can do at that point is, especially if somebody else is losing it, right? We need to make the situation so that they can calm down. How can people calm down? By telling them calm down. By telling them you are overreacting. Will that calm them down? No. What does Islam tell us? How do we deal with anger? The first thing that we need to do is change of posture. If somebody's standing up, you all know this, right? You sit down. If you're sitting down, you lie down. If, you go, you splash water. You need to take yourself out of that amygdala attack and let your body regulate itself. The best thing that you can do, the best thing we can do in families to manage conflict when somebody is losing it is take a timeout, is give them space to calm themselves down. And for us, if we're in the middle of an amygdala attack, we do not have to continue the conversation. We can say, I need a timeout. If someone, if our spouses, children, siblings, whoever it is, if they are telling us, I need a timeout, please respect that. Because know that it's not going to lead to anything good. The issue happens is that we never come back. That's the problem, right? That we keep chasing is because if we don't solve it right there and then, it's never going to come back. So both of us, people who need the timeout and people who are there, have an obligation, kind of, to make sure that the issue gets discussed. Because what happens when the issue does not get discussed, okay? There's two things that happen, okay? So one thing we've talked about is kind of losing it, explosion, right? Explosion. The other thing that happens is implosion, like we shut down. So when we're talking about timeout, we are not talking about shutting down. We are talking about taking space to calm ourselves down. Shutting down, exiting the conversation, never entering it again is not healthy for relationships. That's what Dr. John Gottman calls stonewalling. Stonewalling is actually one of the most destructive things you can do in a relationship, okay? Coming back to when we're losing it. Now, Islam has so much to say on this, okay? The Quran, first of all, right? In Surah Luqman, advice to his son, we all know these verses, be moderate in your pace and lower your voice. Indeed, the most disagreeable sounds is the voice of donkeys. It's the voice of donkeys. Why? What happens when a donkey is braying, or in our neighborhood, a dog is barking like crazy? What happens? You want to close your ears. Do you want to listen to that? You don't. It is unpleasant. Why? Because it is triggering your nervous system. When we are raising our voice and when we are losing it, this is what is happening. People are shutting down. Going back to, do you remember the verses in the Quran where Allah is talking to Nabi Musa and Nabi Harun? Where are they going? They are going to Fir'aun. Okay, who is Fir'aun? Is he some ordinary guy who's losing it? No, he's one of the biggest tyrants ever. And what does Allah tell them? He says, speak to them with a qawlin layyan. Speak to him. He's telling Nabi Musa and Nabi Harun, alayhi salam, speak to Fir'aun in a qawlin layyan. Why? perhaps he will listen to you. Perhaps he will take. So it is a strategic thing that Allah is telling them. Why? Because you're going to say what you're going to say. It's not like you're going to mince the words. It's not like you're going to not give the guidance. But in order to do that, you have to be strategic. You have to let people open their ears. And when you are leading with the negative, when you are being aggressive, when you're raising your voice, when you are criticizing people, their brains are shut, their ears are shut, they are not listening. Okay. Now, Imam Ali alayhi salam says,
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajam.
protect yourself from anger, for its beginning is insanity and its end is remorse or regret. Okay? There's another thing that he says, anger is a form of madness. This is exactly what we're saying, right? Anger is a form of madness. Why? Because our brain, which is our faculty, which Allah has given us, is shut down, okay? Because the angry person regrets it afterwards. But if he does not regret it, why does he not regret it? Why do some people, when you hold them accountable, this was not okay what you said, what do? They present more justification. They will make the other person more wrong. They will never admit that they're wrong, right? This is what Imam Ali calls, then his madness is firmly rooted. Means that there's little hope for somebody who will never take accountability. And you know, there are obviously ways to get them to do that, okay? Now, the opposite of that is, like we said, shutting down, stonewalling, saying it's fine, right? Whatever, okay? So what, what again Imam Ali tells us is, whenever a person conceals a thing in his heart, it manifests itself through unintentional words from his tongue and the expressions of his face. In other words, when you haven't processed it, when you are holding something against someone, your body language, your something is going to show it, okay? There's another very, very interesting narration that comes to us from Imam Baqir alayhi salam.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajam.
A cheerful welcome and a joyous face produce love and nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And a frowning face and a cold welcome produce the hate of Allah and distance from Him. In other words, when we give people the cold shoulder, when we give people the silent treatment, it is very, very destructive. Allah does not like it, okay? And what is doing to the other person, and it's lots of psychology behind that, but I'll just say one thing. You know, when we are in what we call an attachment relationship, right? When we are in a relationship which is very close, which is meaningful, parent, child, sibling, those kinds, spouse, we are bonded, we are emotionally attached. And the thing that we keep asking ourselves unconsciously most of the time is, are you there for me? Are you in this? Are you with me? Do you support me? Obviously, we don't say these things out loud. When a person gives us the cold shoulder or stone walls or anything like that, we go into what is called attachment panic. We don't know where we stand with the other person. Our entire being is impacted. So, and many of us, we didn't learn how to communicate through conflict, right? We did not learn how to speak up for our needs. We didn't learn all of these things. So kind of the only thing that we grew up with maybe, or the only thing that we learned was just shut down, okay? But we need to remind ourselves that it is not, we need to start speaking up, but doing it in a way that is healthy. I have no idea what time I stopped. Okay. So we'll just talk, I did want to mention this idea of pausing, okay? That when we are, if we can, if in the midst of conflict, we can just pause. And there's beautiful verses, I won't go into them, inshallah, next time, about how in that pause, if you remember Allah, He will remember you. In that pause, when shaitan is giving you evil inclinations, run away with your mouth, say whatever, if we can remember to pause, what happens is that our thinking brain comes back online. When our amygdala is running the show, when the alarm bell is running the show, when the emotional hijack is running the show, we don't have access to many resources or tools. What can we do? We can either shut down, we can either fight more, or we can escape, right? Those are the things that are or we can play dead. Those are what is available to us. When we pause, it kind of opens our thinking mind. And when it opens our thinking mind, human gifts that Allah has given us, the gift of conscience. Am I about to say something which is going to be very hurtful? The gift of imagination. I actually don't have to say all of this. I actually can imagine a situation where I say something different or do something different, right? The gift of self-control. What it does is that, like animals or other beings, something happens and they have an automatic reaction. If you throw something at a dog, it will bark. It cannot really think, should I be doing this? No. It lives purely by instinct. So something happens, which is, let's call it the stimulus, and they have a reaction which is attached. Okay, same thing. There is no gap. Human beings have the ability, if they pause, they can create a gap between what happens and what their response is. This is what makes us human. This is literally what distinguishes us from human beings, from animals, okay? In that space, in that gap, and Viktor Frankl calls it that, right? In that space is your humanity. That is where humanity lives. So if nothing else, if we take away nothing else, just remind ourselves to practice pausing. And remember, we've spoken about this in other places. It doesn't have to be a long pause. If you're in a true amygdala hijack, you need the 20 minutes, you need the 30 minutes, whatever, okay? If it's just you said something, and inshallah, we'll talk about this more in the next lecture, but you've said something and you want to take it back, just a few seconds, just 6 seconds can actually kind of regroup you. Allah has designed the human being so perfectly. Like we keep getting chance after chance to come back from like not making it worse, right? And it's, when we want to say something, we have to ask ourselves, is this going to be helpful? Is this taking me where I want? If my goal, again, it starts with intention. If my goal is to look right, make the other person wrong, keep going. You're doing great, right? If my goal is actually to follow the word of God, it is actually to improve my relationships, it is to build myself spiritually, then I need to practice the pause. Okay, Salwa.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wajil farajahum.
So we covered quite a lot of ground today. We talked about that, what is conflict? That is not a failing in itself. Happy families have conflict. In fact, conflict is a sign. The fact that you're still disagreeing on things, the thing that you're still talking, means that the relationship is still alive. Okay. And what gets us into messes is not disagreements, but how we behave when there is a disagreement. We lose control. We say things that we shouldn't. We criticize instead of complaining. And why that never works in relationships is because it shuts us down. It makes us go into an amygdala hijack, and it will only make things worse. Okay. So now let's, talk about why we are here. Before we start talking about Imam Zainul Abidin, I would like to say one thing. During these days, we hear a lot about the Imam. Hopefully, by the way, the best way to use these days is really go back to the treasure that he left us. The treasure, which is the Sahifa. the treasure that will build our spirituality. People ask, how can I get closer to God? What can I do? You need to open the Sahifa and you need to read a passage from it, and it will bring you closer to God. This is the gift that the Imam has left us. And on that note, when we remember the Imam, like I know we've all grown up and we hear it in Masaib and we hear it in Marsiyas, Bimar-e Karbala. He was unwell. Yes, that was God's decree because Imamat had to be saved. That is not his legacy. His legacy is not one that he was sick and then he died. His legacy is the Sahifa. So we need to, when we remember, it's very important during these days. When we remember what happened Ashura and what happened on Karbala and Bibi Zainab and Imam Hussein and Sayyid Sajjad, we need to remember the resistance. We need to remember the fact that no matter what happened to them, they rose up. And that is their legacy. We cannot, when we think of them as bichara, they were mazloom for sure. They were oppressed. That is not their defining quality. The defining quality is resistance against injustice,